Great. Well, welcome to those who are visiting with us live today, as well as those who are watching the recorded session. I know many of you take advantage of that afterwards. It's a really important topic today, I think, the bridging the gap between strategy and execution. And I was talking to my son about this the other night. He's 21. He's at the University of Sydney. And he kind of said, well, Dad, isn't that always going to be a topic? What is it about, today or 2022 that makes it, so topical? So I guess we're going to leave it to you to help us decide that today, but certainly there's plenty of things that are making execution a little interesting at the moment. So, there's definitely some faces that we recognize here with us today and a few who we don't. So I'll take just a moment and introduce Lighthouse. So what's our why? As a team, we're really passionate about providing reliable systems, what we call leadership systems, that help our clients achieve their goals. And what we like to say is that it's our how for your why. And so when you work with us, our why is all about providing systems that should give you some assurance, some predictability, some reassurance that the roadmap that you're on is going to be effective. Who we are, we're all working in challenging times, and 70% of change efforts fail. So our playbook is based on experience of what works, what we know works, and also based on a lot of research into what makes the 30% of change initiatives succeed. And then what we do, we accelerate. We help our clients move from where they are to where they want to go in a predictable fashion, in an accelerated fashion. And today's conversation on execution is a great example. We know execution often stalls when we go back to what's comfortable and what's safe. And so as leaders, we're always pulling people back to what we call the freeway, get back to that sense of acceleration. We want to always be on the freeway, making as much progress as we can as quickly as possible. So that's what we do. So we're really delighted you're with us on this virtual session. We know everyone's busy, so you want to return on the time you're investing. So today, I'll just give you 4 reasons why you might really lean in to the conversation. 1, we're going to review some challenges and some principles about execution. 2nd, we're going to dive into one principle in particular that I think is quite relevant for the time that we're in. 3rd, I know many of you are here to hear from some really senior, really effective leaders about their experiences, their challenges, so you'll get a chance to hear from them. And then finally, you'll have a chance to work with one another in some breakout conversations and actually learn from the other people who are here in our recorded session today. So there's at least a few reasons to stick around until the end so you can come away with some best practices from that assortment of individuals. A couple of housekeeping points. I'll be your timekeeper today. You're all doing a great job already of staying on mute unless you're speaking, which is fantastic. There's numerous points at which we'll invite you to participate. Obviously, we really encourage cameras throughout, but particularly when you get into breakout sessions. So that'll, if anybody's in their jammies, that'll give you just a minute to comb your hair if you need to do that before the breakouts start, because those breakouts are really rich conversations for people. But what I'd like to do now actually is kick off with a poll now that we've got a fair few of you assembled. So I'm going to ask you one question. The question has 5 possible answers, and I would just ask you to answer according to what you think. So think about your organization and tell me, what do you think about its execution? What do you think about your organization's execution? 5 choices, ranging from we set the standard to we have serious issues. So welcome to a couple of you who just joined. If you're just joining, we're starting with a question, and the question is, when you think about your organization, how well do you believe you execute? Thinking about your organization, how well do you think you execute? I'll give you another 15 or 20 seconds to think about that and answer. You're ranging from we set the standard on execution to we have serious issues. Have a look at those selections. Right now we have 73% participating. We're going to go for at least 85. So if you haven't had a chance to click yet, have a look and decide how well does your organization execute. Counting you down from 10 seconds. If you haven't popped your answer in, please do so. Okay, that last person, thank you. We're now above 80. Let's have a look. Sharing the results. So 70% of those of us here today believe that we're in that middle ground. We're functional. Yeah, we get a lot of our most important things accomplished, but the journey, we find it a bit chaotic and inefficient. A couple of us felt like we're outstanding, and a couple of us feel like we're lagging. So that's kind of a normal distribution. We don't have anybody at the two tails, so now we sort of know who's with us today. So we're kind of in that middle spot. So I think as we go through, let's keep in mind, what is it about that chaos and ineffectiveness that we'd like to change? So today, what you want out of these sessions. You want learning and application. Some of you want to meet people to connect with afterwards. Most of you want just one or two practical tips, things you can take back to your organization and start on, immediately. So I believe that somewhere in this, there's something for everyone. I'm going to get our panel to introduce themselves just briefly. We're really excited with the panel that we have for you today. So I'll just ask Joff and then Rowan and Kellie to just do a brief introduction as to who they are, what their roles are.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, I'm Joff Allen. I'm the CEO of Educo International Group, and looking forward to participating today.
Hi, everyone. CEO and President of ICMS, Rowan, Courtney, O'Connor. For those that don't know, ICMS is one of the largest providers, higher education providers in Australia, with around 2,000 students, and we teach everything from English language all the way through to Masters, Master of International Business, things like that.
Good morning, I'm Kellie Robertson, and I've recently joined as the Chief Development Director for Good Return, so my first foray into the not-for-profit sector after 25 years leading private bank businesses at a number of major banks. So I'm delighted to be here today, and just a quick word on Good Return if you don't know about us. Our mission is to really help lift women out of poverty. We operate in 9 countries and including a program in Australia in the Kimberley region. So delighted to be here, Eric, and participating in the panel.
Thanks, Kellie. Now we're really glad to have all of you. So a little background on execution, right? Just to kind of whet your appetites, I suppose. So through the month of July, we've been publishing things out to our various channels, including LinkedIn, about the topic of strategy and how do you get the most important things done when there's so many competing opportunities for us to spend time and resources. How do we stay on track and get the most important things done? And we've actually assembled that into an ebook, so we'll have a chance to get that to some of you after the session today. I'm not going to debrief all of that with you, but just touch on a couple of points. But first, can you imagine, imagine getting on an airplane and the captain saying, based on industry performance over the last 30 years, we have about a 30% chance of safely landing this plane at the intended destination on time and with your bags present. You have about a 30% chance. Now that's probably not an airplane that we're going to get on, speaking for myself. So the story probably is 7 out of 10 large initiatives, large change initiatives fail. That's what many different sources of research tell us, 7 out of 10. So my hope today is that the rest of the session helps all of us move into that rare 30%, right? And again, it's the one or two things you can pick up on today, hopefully, that are gonna get you there. So this is part of what we've been publishing, and I'm not going to go through the list. You'll be relieved to see, but this is a non-exhaustive list, first of all. And in the last 2.5 months, I've interviewed 8 CEOs or heads of transformation, right? So these are individuals, men and women, who are responsible to get the most important things done. And in these interviews, 3 of these 10 issues or challenges have really risen to the top. So I'll just show you what those are. So first, number 2, lack of alignment. And in particular, what these folks are telling me is that we're pretty aligned at the senior team level, but when we get in beneath that into the middle levels of our organization, we don't seem to share that same sense of clarity, and we get breakdowns. Things tend to fall apart a bit in the middle. The next one that was highlighted in these interviews I did was the silo mentality. And I had one head of transformation. She told me, Eric, it's the white spaces in between my org chart that gives me the headaches. It's not that, this bit didn't work or that bit didn't work, but it's when this bit hands to that bit. She said, I could tell you story after story of where the white spaces in my org chart are really the challenge to my execution. And then the third one, and I didn't necessarily, the first 2 I kind of thought might rise to the top. The third one that rose to the top when presented with these options was fixed mindsets. And maybe this is biased by the sample of people that I was speaking to, but most of our clients are leaders, senior leaders, and their purpose is to make a change happen in the organization. And so they get quite frustrated when they see this resistance, this lack of willingness to try new things. And I just almost had to hold a mirror up as well to them and say, look, that's part of your job, is to help people on that pathway. But we do know absolutely that curiosity, experimentation, and learning to try again after we fail makes a great platform for execution. So something about that mindset, I believe, is really fundamental to having success. So I'm sure we all agree there's some challenges. We've already heard from you that you think that as a group, you're kind of 5 or 6 out of 10. If there weren't challenges, then the success rate would be bigger than 30%. The remainder of the session is about what can we do to succeed. So as I mentioned in our recent publications, there's 5 principles that we've kind of isolated that we believe are important to execute well. And today I'm really only going to speak to one of those, but the reason why we're stressing modern principles of execution is that there's actually a lot of management techniques that were really helpful back when, we were all in assembly lines in the industrial age. But we're suggesting that some of these need to be replaced by some more modern ways of managing execution or of driving execution. But I'm just going to touch on one. And I love this quote. I absolutely love it. I'll give you just a minute to let it sink in. So Steve Jobs from Apple, we don't hire smart people to tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. So how many times, though, as we read and as we go about our barbecues on the weekends and share with friends, how many times do we hear frustrated people talking about how much more they have to offer? More ideas, more productivity, more contribution. So principle number 1 is what we call unlock contribution. And many of us, hold some unexamined assumptions that actually limit people from contributing. And sometimes it's a reliance on top-down command and control approaches that, again, were great when it was carrot and stick and produce some widgets on the assembly line, but really need to be examined, because with that sort of style, you're unlikely to get creativity, collaboration, exploration. And so when we're confronted with dynamic environments to execute in, things fall over. So the principle is to unlock contribution. But in our experience, not just any contribution, it's by soliciting the input of 2 key groups in your execution. The first group is the extended leadership team. So the folks that report into the very most senior team. So this is where strategy actually translates into action. So that's a key group. And I would leave you with that as something to think about. The second is your frontline staff. They've got close proximity to the customer, to the challenges, and they provide really critical insights. So as it relates to unlocking contribution, those would be the two groups that we would really want you to think about. And just to illustrate this phenomena for one more moment, I'm going to present you an experiment. You've probably heard of Daniel Kahneman, who wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow. So in his time as a researcher, he set up this experiment with lottery tickets in the US. And during the experiment, picture this, half the participants were randomly assigned to numbered lottery tickets, like the one you see on the screen. So they've got a number printed. The other half were given a blank piece of paper, and they were asked to write down a lottery number on their ticket. And the researchers then asked participants to buy back the tickets. Hey, we want to purchase these back from you. And given that the lottery is pure chance, you might think that participants would feel pretty equally ambivalent about their ticket, whether it was printed or whether they wrote it themselves, right? What actually is the difference? And they would value it equally. But what the researchers found out is that they had to pay at least 5 times more to those who wrote down their own number. At least 5 times more to those who wrote down their own number. So it seems that, going back to unlock contribution, if we can give people some autonomy, some amount of choice as it relates to how they are asked to execute, we're at least 5 times more likely to engage them and actually get them contributing to their highest potential. So look, more is available by way of content. Be happy if you wanted to consume that via the ebook. But today is really about, I think, hearing from people who have been on the front lines and very executive positions, both, about execution. So to tee up the rest of the session, I'd love to hand us over to our panel. And I think Joff is going to get us started. So Joff, over to you, and I'm happy to click through at the pace you want. And by the way, to whet your appetite, Joff is going to be co-hosting breakout room number 1 in about half an hour. So stay tuned for that. Joff, over to you.
Thanks, Eric. I think you can flip to the next screen. That first slide. Yeah, so just a bit of background about our organisation. I think the thing here that I just wanted to sort of set the context is that we've always operated in a reasonably complex environment whereby we chose to be located in 20 different countries. We've got students who we recruit from more than 100 countries. So we've always been dealing in sort of this complex environment, which created from the day we set the company up this view that we needed to find a way to be able to bring people together so that we minimized as much as possible those gaps that, Eric, you mentioned earlier, that with the one individual you've been talking about, that white space in the org chart. So that was something we've always been dealing with. And so, from day one, Zoom meetings and participating remotely was something that we've always worked on, and it's thought of different ways to try and be better at executing. So we think we embedded it in our DNA, and as time's gone on, we've adjusted along the way. So if you just flick to the next slide, please, Eric. Where we started was this whole idea about execution versus strategy, and the thing we started with was what most companies did sort of back when, which was sort of these very wordy plans. And given just thinking that half of our staff across the world have chosen to be career academics, and so typically they like to have documentation and be very verbose about what they want to do. But so we sort of had this when we started. Everyone just gets busy, and you're just always hearing this thing called change. So what we did was introduce the Ogsm Framework for us, which we know at the start sort of helped us frame everything up so we could put a plan on a page. So the company had a plan on a page, and each division has a plan on a page, which just sets it out very simply as words, numbers, words, numbers. So, what is my objective? And that's some words. And then what is my goal? So what are the numerical measures that I'm going to be aiming for, and what are the strategies that I'm going to implement to achieve those goals, and then what are the measures that I'm going to use along the journey to ensure that the strategies that I'm implementing are going to achieve the goals that I've set down. So if I hit my goals, I'm by and large going to hit my objectives. If I hit my strategies, I'm by and large going to hit my goals. And if I'm measuring it effectively, how I should be able to adjust along the way. So we set it on the basis of having a 4-year financial budget, but a 1-year OGSM, which said, what do I have to do today to get this year done? And what do I have to do this year to ensure that we're set up for the following 4 years? And so what we knew when we set that out was that we would typically look at measures that were lagging. And that's where we started, 10, 12 years ago, as having lagging measures. I might just get you to go to the next one, please, Eric. And that worked for a little bit, but what we found was that we got ourselves into a situation where we had plans that people couldn't put onto one page. They wanted to extend them onto 2 pages. So they became really wordy. So we forced this change of saying, okay, we're going to limit the number of strategies you're allowed to implement. We're going to reduce the number of measures, and we're going to change the measures from being lagging to leading. So very interested in what we were talking about earlier, Eric, about, getting people's ideas forward, but we needed to put it into a context and in a compartment that could be digested, rather than something that was wordy and got us back to where business plans and targets and strategies were, which was very wordy, stuck in a drawer, we'd never see it again. So this concept of having leading indicators was something we worked on some time ago, and it takes time for people to understand that it's okay to have a leading indicator, and it's okay then to look at it regularly and to be able to change your strategy along the way. So it's this whole thing about it's okay to fail, and I'll talk about that shortly. But that's where we sort of on this journey got to, let's get people to think about, what do I need to do to know very early whether the strategy I'm implementing is actually going to work. So 2 of the things we did then to try and sort of expand this down, and you talked about it a minute ago, Eric, about getting to that next level of management. We took the view that next level of management was interesting, but we wanted to identify the individuals in the organization who would be at whatever level of management, whose actions and tasks they did directly influenced earnings. So if they were doing something that was of such high importance that directly influenced earnings, whether they were a senior manager or not, we wanted to include those people and get their voice at the table as early as we could, and get them to really understand this piece about leading indicators and how it feeds into our strategy, what our core values are, and just being able to have them at the table, which that table sits every week. And every week we sit down, and the people who are responsible for the OGSMs, so it's usually divisional heads, we choose them senior, we call them senior vice presidents, but divisional heads, they need to speak to their leading indicators based on how they're tracking that week towards their next set of leading indicators. And we've chunked everything down, which I won't go into now, but trunk it down so that they can talk to it very concisely. But what we do is we say to that group of people who are presenting it, we don't want you to read the information that's on the page, because I can read that. Everyone can add up, everyone can see what's happening. But what you need to do is really tell us what's not on that page, which is what are the 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 things. And we have this view that, you've got 5 fingers on a hand for a reason, or 4 on a thumb, which is you just want to be able to clearly explain what you're doing simply to close that gap. So what are you doing to close that gap? And one of the things you could be doing to close that gap in your measure is to change your strategy. And that's okay, but you need to speak to it each week. And even though we have things that are longer term, because you have leading indicators, they have points in time where things need to be done. So holding people accountable to tell the group what's happening is confronting when you first introduce it, but what it does is it gets people to really learn and understand that it's okay to talk about it. And in fact, we now have groups of people who are really proud to talk about, the fact that they're achieving their leading indicators and they're ahead of the curve. And even when they're not, it's not a scary thing. So that's sort of helped us on this whole idea around executing each strategy for breakfast, which is a term that we've heard many times, and some of my former colleagues have spoken about it, yet they've only spoken about, they've not implemented. So adjusting along the way is something we've done over the last 3 years. Eric, I'll just get you to flip to that last slide, thanks. And so, we think about, for the purposes of today's topic, where are we today? And so, and it's really about, keeping on topic here, where are we in closing the gap? And I think we're better than we have been before. I think the group is definitely more thoughtful about leading indicators, and we're therefore a better place to grow as the market rebounds. Being in 20 different countries, I used to say to people, I'd wake up thinking about 20 different things, or there were 20 things that were going to pop up every day about something was going on around the world. Just given the way the world is now, that number's blown out to 200, because we have different people at different levels making different decisions that impact what we do, and they don't work for us. So there's lots of different things that are going on. What we found too with the last couple of years is that having the shifting from, sort of half the staff using Zoom and being located in different countries to everybody working remotely, it created an environment where it was okay to talk about lead indicators. And so we set up, when we first sort of all went home about 2.5 years ago, and said, okay, what are the 3 things we need to do to keep everyone in their job, keep the business running well, and for us to come out the other side? So we chose the 3 things. And for us, it was about, we want to keep all our customers. So we want to keep every student. So what do we all need to do, whether you're an academic, whether you're a president of an institution, whether you're in recruitment or conversion or enrollment, whatever, or what can you do to help that student stay happy as we transition from sitting on a campus to sitting in front of a screen, stuck in your apartment or stuck in your home country because you might have been traveling back to see your folks or doing whatever, and our borders got shut around the world. So keeping everyone there. We then wanted to keep them there. We then wanted to make sure that they had the ability to pay. So it's okay, it's great to have customers, but if they don't pay, it makes life very difficult. So how can we think of ways to keep them to pay? And then how can we think of ways to grow, given all of the issues that we're faced with today, let alone 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago? You still have to grow. So let's think about how we can grow. So I think that made that's something we introduced that really helped people build on the sort of the OGSM, moving to lead indicators, talking about it each week to say, okay, now it's now short term. What do we need to do in the short term? And so we kept resetting those shorter term targets. So where we are now too, I think right now is, we think there's really 3 things that are impacting us. We think disruption fatigue is really negatively impacting a lot of ability for us to pick up and take advantage of wherever the opportunity might be. We also think this thing about being nervous about failing, because there's no sort of direct linear equation about, if you do this, this will happen, as we used to be able to see. So we tried this 5 years ago and it worked. And looking back at what we did 5 years ago or even 3 years ago, we need to kind of forget about it, because the world is very, very different for every single part of our market. So it's okay to fail fast. So how do we get that into the mindset of people, that it's okay to fail fast? And one of the things we're doing there is this idea that we learned through the last 2.5 years, when we actually created a digital product that we launched, and we built it with Accenture out of Hong Kong, and they taught us this idea of agile and scrum sprints, which is a different word for what we thought we were doing, but having a name around it, having a framework around it, being able to point to, here's what 600 of the best companies in the world do, and it actually works, and it's okay, and it really scrunches things down. We think that that's going to be one thing that we're introducing or looking to introduce, what will help match each of the individual areas that we're working with how we think their markets are going to change. So for us, in closing the gap, we just always think about what are the 3 most important things for us. It's knowing what you do, it's being able to talk about what you do, and even more particularly today, I talk about what you do and talk about what we're doing to fix things. But even more particularly today, it's just keeping it as simple as possible. And that's the most important thing for us, is decomplicating it, because we've complicated it over the last 2.5 years. And prior to that, we tried to make it even more complicated, but it's just making it as simple as possible so that there's only one or two things you need to focus on. Thanks, Eric.
Wow, Joff, there's so much interesting in there. I think it's what strikes me is that there's some principles there. Like you're trying new methods, like however you need to, but there's some principles. Keep it simple, shorter term. Sounds like you're getting shorter and shorter and shorter in how you're sort of planning and executing as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, and it's the external environment that's forcing us to do that too. So that's something that we just need to continue to adapt to, and that's the other part about it. It's okay to change.
We do have one question, Joff, that I'll send you from the chat here, and that is David's asking, can you please elaborate on what you mean by it's okay to fail fast?
Yeah, so the thing about developing any sort of plan and any sort of strategy is that you're not always going to get it right the first time. So meaning to fail fast is, let's find some measures of lead indicators that tell us very early if we're on point. And so I'd rather fail in 4 weeks than fail in 6 months. So it's about being able to find those right lead indicators that are saying, if we do this, then over a period of time, whatever that time is, this will be the result. It's about figuring out that if we need to get to 5 by the end of the next week and we only get to 2 and we change our strategy, that's okay. We're absolutely fine with that. I'd rather fail fast than fail slow.
Right. And I see Glenn has his hand up. Glenn?
Yes,
more
my
for
thing
Joff.
along that question there, Joff, I wonder, and I'm experiencing, we're about to go through in my organisation some fairly significant transformational change, and being quite a stable and conservative type of organisation is one in which that's people perceive, I guess, a fail fast as almost a detraction into their performance. How did you go about either educating or shifting the thought process around saying, I perceive myself to be an extremely strong performer. I don't want to fail. I don't fail. That messes with my head. How did you, I guess, get your team over the line, so to speak, in terms of taking them to be able and willing to maybe experiment a little bit more?
Yeah, so the nasty answer to that is it took time, and we still haven't got everyone there. But we think the best way to do this is to put a framework around it and call it something that people can pin to and see that other organizations use it, like an Agile or a Scrum, which is a successful implementation. And it's about failing. Sometimes it's about taking the word, we find at least, taking the word fail out and saying it's okay to change. It's okay to change tack and to change direction because we haven't hit our numbers. And that sort of then gives people a bit more comfort around being able to shift quickly rather than just using the word fail.
Thank you. That's really good insight. Appreciate that.
Well done. All right, that's a great start. Thanks, Joff, for getting us kicked off so well. Turn it over to Rowan now.
Thanks, Eric. So my slides are very much more example-based rather than framework-based. To tell you a little bit about ICMS, just to give you some context. So 2,000 students, higher education, 3 campuses in Sydney, about 300 staff, around 50 different award programs, operating out of about 12 countries. We have been in business since 1998, and we are currently a higher education institute, as Texas would call it. There's a lot of overlaps with what Joff was saying, and we've all been through the same events. I think and it's all affecting us in different ways. Maybe if you could move to the next slide, Eric. I'll just talk a little bit about that. So, in an example of a current challenge that we're facing at ICMS, which we are all facing together, we've talked a lot about the COVID hangover. That is affecting us in many ways. Well, the first point there, one of the major decisions that a lot of businesses had to make through COVID was whether they're going to staff to survive, staff to operate, or staff to scale. some businesses were in the fortunate position where they could start to scale. Obviously, Zoom was one of those businesses, and I'm not sure they're there at the moment, but that's where they were. Some were in operation mode and some were in survival mode. But I think the decisions that businesses made around those through 2020 and 2021 are really affecting them in 22 and 23. And that was a bit of a tripwire because the easy option was to go straight to survival mode. And there were two indicators for survival mode that I saw. One was the money was gone, so I had to, or the other one was fear that I should. And those that did it for fear were the ones that have been hurt the most, I think, because they're in a position now where obviously the unemployment rate is where it is. They can't find staff, they can't find the right skills, and now they're caught in the rebound. And for us, we were fortunate to take the approach of starting to operate, which left us in a position where we could take advantage of when those borders eventually did open. Because you can imagine for an international business, half of the business came from overseas. You shut the borders, you change everything. So overnight, which was something that wasn't on the risk index prior to COVID, which I've now put it on the risk index just in case the whole world stops. The changes to society and how we work is obviously having a massive impact on us. We've talked a little bit about the working from home mentality at the moment. People have got used to that. People are comfortable with that. There's a lack of competition in the market. There are places where Zoom and online help, but there are also places where it doesn't. So getting that balance right is something that we're all trying to work out. Broken supply chains, visa issues, despite the fact that obviously the borders were shut over those years, even when the borders have opened, because of the COVID hangover effect in immigration offices, other countries, health checks, the flow of our customers is still disrupted, making the need to adapt for us very important. And then customers have changed. We were pre-COVID, we were a face-to-face business, university, like a university. All students on campus in class, hopefully, all the time. Then within a 2-week period, we were 100% online business. And had you have asked me in 2019, would we ever do online? I would have said something like, hopefully one day. Or if you had said to me, would you ever be 100% online business? I would have said absolutely not. And then obviously the wheels fell off, and within a 2-week period we were. So if you could just flip to the next slide, we can talk a bit more about that. So in 2020, we had just completed a 3-year strategic plan. We spent all of 2019 talking about it. We had all the frameworks. We had Power BI set up with all the metrics, the KPIs. We were ready to go. We knew what we wanted. We had a vision, and off we went. And then everything happened in COVID, and I felt like just getting the plan and getting a lighter and just lighting it up because it went out the window. As soon as COVID hit, our strategies turned from 3-year strategies to daily strategies. I pulled the entire executive team into a room, and we met twice a week. And the first, we actually became aware of COVID much earlier than most Australian businesses, because as soon as China shut their borders, we actually had 2 students in Wuhan. So they weren't able to return to campus, and that's how we became much more aware of the situation. And obviously, as it developed into Sydney in March, we were in a position where we had to evacuate hundreds of students off campus out of accommodation. We, as I said, had to turn our entire suite of product from face-to-face delivery to online delivery before the mid-term, mid-study period. So you couldn't actually stop teaching at any point. So a lot, and obviously staff had to be relocated from office to home, which again, lots of businesses were in the same boat. So a lot was happening, but the ability for having the right people in the room was, that being the executive team, taught me a lot. I mean, we had some strategies that, as I mentioned, online. Let's just use online as an example. That was mentioned in the strategic plan with a 3-year horizon. So we had a long time to achieve that one, and then obviously on reflection, we did it in 2 weeks. And then you start to think, what else could we do in 2 weeks? If we really wanted to, if the business really sat down, stopped everything else and just focused on this, if it's important enough, what could be achieved? So that was a surprise and a massive learning for myself and the executive team of what we could do if we set our minds to it. That was more in the short term. That group continued on for 6 months, and then obviously when we got into the rhythm of things and the lockdowns, we got very good at it, so we didn't need to meet so regularly. But in the longer term, we actually rewrote the strategic plan in 2021 completely, because everything was out the window. We decided to look at it again and say, well, here's where we are now. There's a new gap. How are we going to get there? It's going to be a new pathway. It's not the same as it was. So we started to focus on technology. We're an online business now. We're not face-to-face. What does that mean? What do we need to do in the classrooms? How much money do we need to allocate in CapEx? How are we going to manage? We had 60 different countries enrolled pre-COVID. How are we going to manage 60 different time zones with our class schedule, our timetable, recording our products, having it online available at will, on demand? All these different, became like a streaming service. All these different aspects changed our business model and how we went about teaching our students. The next one there, one thing I've noticed a lot in Eric's introduction, particularly in those 3 red boxes, it's all about people, right people in the right jobs. People. And a key part of, as I mentioned already, of our execution was just simply staff retention, appreciating our people and knowing that we have the right people in the right jobs. That can make things a hell of a lot easier. And on recent trips that I've been on of late, I've seen a lot of people that aren't in the right jobs, whether they've been forced to be there, whether they just thought they'd give it a go, or whatever the reason is. It's making it more difficult for that business to be in that position. Over the COVID years and even to now, one of our biggest pieces of feedback from our staff was the need for more communication. People, when they're in a decentralized environment, particularly online from home, suddenly social interaction and communication become a massive factor in how you're going to execute your strategies. Mental health was a big part of that. And one of our messages through that whole period was just get ready for the rebound. Don't not be ready for when things turn around, and they will turn around. And that was that word on hope there. Didn't let people think it's over, it's ended, we're out of the game. So getting ready for the rebound was a big one. Flexibility, we can't control everything. Some things are forced on us, and we need to work with that. So we didn't try and demand. We just went with what we should be doing. And that worked for us. And then we've kind of heard a variation of this before already. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Joff had execution eats strategy for breakfast. We do focus a lot on culture. And if we're going to talk about people, that's culture. So we use a pulse check once a quarter, get a feel for where our culture's at. Are people happy? Are people not happy? What issues do they have? It's obviously just a survey, but they can also provide their opinions. Every 2 years, we run a full OCI as well. For those that haven't done that before, it's a cultural assessment of the business on their behavior. It defines, basically looking at constructive behavior versus destructive behavior. That's a massive tool for us to then feed into the business plans of the departments. We ask them to then focus on their cultural plan once they've got their wagon wheel worked out. So they've got a strategy for 2 years, or strategies for 2 years, to deal with that before we do the next OCI, and hopefully we'll see improvements in whatever they need to look at. So culture was key for us, and always will be. It's never going to end. And those implementing all of that really put us, I feel, ahead of the game. We are seeing a massive rebound in these intakes in 2022, and our forecasts are all looking very good. So FY23 started with a bang. That's all from me, Eric.
Thanks, Rowan. We do have time if anybody has a particular question, either pop it in the chat or just stick up your hand if anybody has one for Rowan. If not, you can visit with him in a breakout room in a few minutes. Well, Rowan, some of the things in there are just fantastic. I think the get ready for the rebound, and over communicating. People are all remote now, and how do we face into that as leaders? So I think what you've got on the page here is, you could do worse than some of these just as leadership principles on how to lead through really complex, chaotic times. So great to hear that FY23 is starting out so strong. Thank you very much. Okay, Kellie, welcome.
Thanks, Eric. I'll just get you to slip to the next slide. And I really just wanted to focus the conversation today on the three real derailers right now in terms of executing, on your strategy. And Rowan mentioned people, and that's certainly, the topic in terms of the war for talent. And everyone knows losing key people is going to derail your execution. And there's two things that I think leaders need to be really focused on right now in that space. So obviously retention and retention in this environment we've got people opting out, we've got people, being offered, a huge amount of money to change organization. And what we're seeing in terms of the visibility or lack of visibility that remote working has created is that those development plans and motivators that we would have been across with individuals are not well understood now. So, leaders need to step back and reflect on retention, understand those motivators for individuals. Is it reward? Is it flexibility, engagement with group executive, stretch assignments, leadership development, secondment, formal study support? What is it that's motivating these individuals, and make sure we've got a clear priority around it. So, and that needs to be thoughtful and creative. And I just wanted to share, a quick anecdote with you on this one. I had a top performer whose spouse was hospitalized, working through mental health issues, and a couple of young sons. And my staff member was really struggling, in terms of respite, and particularly on the weekend. And, becoming aware of this, and he was a key person in terms of execution of strategy. And he was very open about this challenge in his personal life. And so we arranged for childcare 2 Saturday afternoons a month for a number of months. Now, that is a very thoughtful and individual retention strategy at a time when he was in crisis, with his family. And I think that, the feedback that I got for years after that was that the support and care we showed at that time meant that loyalty was never questioned. And this was someone who was a key person who was always approached by competitors. And we always had that open discussion in terms of how valuable, this sort of retention strategy was. So, I think that leaders need to not only understand what motivators are for people or what the challenges are for people in terms of retention, but really get creative and individualized around some of those strategies. I think the other thing with retention is make sure, you spoke about the ELT, Eric, the executive leadership team, and the importance, make sure they've got contact with this cohort, in terms of your key people, and make sure that there's some formalized structure around that. If it's a working breakfast once a quarter, make that happen and make it a priority. What you're telling people there is, we value your input. We want to have a session with you. We want you to be open and tell us what's working and what's not. This is time really well invested. I think the final point on retention that I would ask key leaders to think about here is everyone, there's a monthly performance discussion that goes on. Usually, it might be an hour, 58 minutes is stepping through the KPIs, how you're tracking, maybe 2 minutes at the end, how any development areas. Flip that around, in the performance discussion up front, the development plans, what's really important? What is that retention hook? Are we across it? Not that 2 minutes at the end, which it's going to be left behind. So the war for talent, it's a massive issue. It's bigger than ever. Retention needs to be a priority for people. But the second thing, and I don't think this is done very well, is that succession planning, formalized succession planning sessions by your leadership team. I, in the past, have implemented this quarterly as part of your ongoing people review. And there's two parts to that. First of all, who inside the organisation is there on the bench being warmed up to take over from key people? And number two, if they're not inside the organisation, have you identified talent outside the organisation? And who has the relationship there? And has there been a conversation, and have you been proactive around it? So failure to build a bench like this in terms of succession planning is going to mean you're going to have prolonged gaps, in your execution. There is no question if you haven't got that right. It's really interesting for me coming out of big banks for 25 years. First month in a new role in a not-for-profit organisation, there's a gap around a key role. There's no bench at all. Where I would have come from, there would have been a bench. So it's going to mean, and this is a really key role around corporate partnership management, and is key in terms of executing the strategy. So for me, it's about starting to implement some of those priorities in this new organisation. So retention and succession planning in terms of the war for talent. Communication, Rowan's touched on it, Joff's touched on it. I'm seeing you just need to over communicate at every opportunity. And practically, we had a wonderful example when Kellie was CEO of the Westpac Group. She would ask people in the lift, if you were in the lift with her, what are our strategic priorities? Talk me through them. And it was a great test because leaders knew you didn't want to have any of your team caught out with that. And so there was a constant requirement to over communicate at every turn what the strategic priorities were. A couple of practical things here. Meeting agendas, we run meetings weekly, have the strategic priorities on that agenda. Make sure that the way that updates are structured from your people in that agenda follow what the strategic priorities are, not just a download of what they've been doing for the week. So add some structure, into that reporting back. Rowan spoke about lead reporting, lead indicator reporting. I think for all of your reporting, lead and lag reporting, use that as another communication tool and an opportunity to make sure every piece of reporting that hits people's desks or dashboards that they're looking at is reinforcing your strategic priorities and measuring the impact on strategic priorities. So what I'm seeing is there's a lot of legacy reporting that's hanging around. So use the reporting as an opportunity to make sure it's locking in and communicating what's important. Because as you know, what gets measured gets done. So I think that's, it's another thing that you can do to continually reinforce what is important around your priorities and reviewing them at every opportunity. The last thing is really around lack of individual accountability and alignment. It's been really interesting coming into a smaller organization and at Good Return. The whole team is involved in setting the strategy. Now, they've set a 3-year strategy, then that rolls down to an annual business plan, and then it rolls down to quarterly team and individual goal setting. And the team, because they've been involved with it, I mean the whole team, which is quite interesting, they become accountable for that execution, and you can actually see that and feel it. Now, that can be done in a small team environment, but I'd contrast that with the rump of my experience for decades in large corporates. And, that's not possible for every individual to be involved. So the key there really is around, your KPIs and your incentive programs, aligning properly to strategic priorities. And, everyone has seen KPIs just roll into the next year and not be reviewed. Make sure, because it's time consuming, right, to make sure you're doing that review and make sure you're doing that review for every role. So I think, that is practically something that has to happen all the time. I think the other key one in terms of your award or your incentive programs, and one of the biggest disconnects in terms of execution that I've seen is where part of, the way that their incentive is calculated is a deliverable which is so far removed from their day-to-day that they feel quite frustrated and they have no control over that deliverable. and therefore there's no link in terms of what they're doing to strategic outcomes and how they're being rewarded. So, I think we've got to make sure that you've got to tighten all that up and regularly review that. So, they're the three key areas, Eric, that I'm seeing at the moment that are certainly creating gaps in execution.
Thanks, Kelly. Well, I knew when we talked about, you joining our panel, you were going to bring these two really interesting perspectives. One's quite fresh and not for profit, and then this other in some ways, quite contrasting things. I'll just see if there's any other questions, but one that I would have is, would you say it's 98% common and 2% different? Or where would you put that percentage in terms of the two environments?
Yeah, I think it's too hard. Well, it'd be a hard call to make at the moment, in terms of 1 month in versus, let's call it over 25 years elsewhere. So, but I think there's going to be opportunities to embed, put it this way, some structure in my new environment that doesn't exist. That would be my early observation. What that differential looks like, it's too early to call.
Great. Does anybody have anything, questions? You want to put your hand up, type something in the chat for Kelly before we move into the breakouts? Glenn.
Hi, Kelly. Really interesting points you made there around providing some structure and some order of sequence pieces there. I'm going through at the moment a couple of opportunities, or pursuing some opportunities to really turn a number of those processes on its head in terms of the monthly check-ins and all the rest of those kind of things. Any appetite to share with Pride, or allow me to steal with Pride to draw some inspiration from that kind of thing? I think that we have some very similar synergies. That'd be lovely too. Yeah, absolutely. And look, I try to give some practical things that you can go away and do now. And please feel free to do that, Glenn, and reach out afterwards if I can help any further. Yeah, that'd be great. I'll ask Eric for your details. I'll work with him pretty closely, so that'd be great.
All right, well done, everyone. So for those who haven't yet had a chance to flick your camera on and ask a question or interact, now is your chance. It's coming up really, really quickly. So we asked, dozens of people, what do you want to get out of these webinars? And one of the things that quite a slice of people really want is to meet some new colleagues and to be able to take these relationships potentially into the future. Welcome back, everyone. Well, the time always goes quick in those conversations, but we're absolutely committed to getting you wrapped up on time. So I might just start with Pete. What did you and Joff and the team talk about in the first room?
Well, we talked about a lot, and I think we certainly canvassed a range of challenges. I think number one was simplicity, having too many strategic objectives. And was really complicating, and I think the extension conversation on that was that's actually often loaded upon core business or business as usual. That's not really counted in terms of then how that affects individuals and teams or areas. So one is really trying to reduce the amount of strategic initiatives, but also to bring the connection and the integration between business as usual and what's new. And we talked then about, what is the right goal? Sometimes we're so outcomes focused with what we're trying to do, but when in a context of a lot of uncertainty, perhaps we need some more principles or some more qualitative considerations to match up with the quantitative, having some principles, having some, validating our assumptions that we're making as well, and really questioning some of that. So there's probably more emphasis then to do more reviews and more discussions about how we're going and really explore the why not. And there were some really good points made about just, digging into, should this be parked now? What's the trade-off? Do we still need to be doing this? If not, kind of why not? Some more conversations really about a lot of that. So yeah, that was, I think then also what's the right structure to keep you on track, in terms of the governance and things like that we started to get into. So yeah, that was a quick summary.
Thank you very much. And that's in the ebook, actually. It's the fewer, bigger, better principle. So well done to room one. How about room two? Mark and team?
Yeah, a couple of observations, Eric, just to share with the group. there was plenty of, in the reflection of the different people in the group, the presence of the alignment silos and mindset challenges, which were the ones that you called out as to what the threats of execution are. They were quite apparent in the examples that were provided. Rowan gave some good examples of being able to provide greater buy-in around the strategy and actually getting it to be given the sort of level of priority and visibility. I think a couple of the ones that Rowan shared was including the championing of the strategic plan and the culture at department level within the job descriptions of all of his direct reports. And he also talked about an all hands department meeting where he would personally attend and share the strategic vision, purpose, direction plan. A lot of visibility, lead by example, and also the consistency in terms of the way in which the message was actually being conveyed out to the rest of the organisation. Another area that we talked about too was just what the driver of change was, whether it was the pressure that was actually created by the immediacy of some of the challenges that we've confronted over the last couple of years, you know, a gun to your head sort of thing, because you really had no choice but to actually make that change. Alan, one of the participants, talked about the significance of being able to sort of get that proper planning underneath, even though the pressure is very, you know, it's opportune at times because it is a driver or a catalyst of change. But underpinning that proper planning, it really gives you the ability to be able to get sustainable change. It should be, you know, certainly keeping maybe a bifocal lens, short term on the pressure, but longer term on the discipline planning to get the sustainability in terms of what you want to secure. So quite a robust conversation from everyone, and really appreciated the contribution. Thanks, Eric.
Excellent. And David, yourself and the team there?
Yeah, we were very similar. Sorry, just checking you can hear me. Yep, cool. We were very similar in that everyone in the group participated, and I thank them for that. And we got further insight from Kellie as a result. So one of the topics was around the operationalization of strategy, that often companies do a very good job in the executive team of devising the strategy. Then they try and jump straight into implementation without focusing on what we'd call a middle layer of the operationalization of that strategy. David had a very good point in that where he works in part of the Haynes Australia group in Bonds Apparel. Their strategy actually hasn't changed very much over a number of years. But even given that, there are still too many people who are not quite clear on the strategic framework. So that led to a discussion about the real need and the power of communication. And again, the extended leadership team and how you embrace everyone and help them through. Julie has had some extra challenges being head of supply chain. We all know what COVID's done for that. And she, like a number of other people, have seen a lot of change fatigue, doing their best job to make people understand the strategy and the imperatives. You've got to take people on the journey and really help them out to be motivated and committed. But it's particularly difficult when there is so much change. And Farah, who works for the same organisation, amplified that feeling as well. And we had a discussion about sometimes the change in priorities can happen too frequently from an employee's perspective, and they feel like they've got too many priorities as well. So again, how do we keep it simple, which is what I think something Joff was talking about. Sometimes less is more in terms of the priorities. But I think we get a sense a lot of employees can feel lost. And if they think the leadership is changing all of the time, they can lose their anchor point. Himanshu had similar experiences as Julie and Farah, and just agreed with the need for the communication and to really understand what role each employee plays in terms of achieving the strategic objectives of the organisation. Paul emphasised that you've really got to make people feel that they were part of the decision ideally. Now, sometimes that isn't able to be the case. Sometimes they're not part of the strategic review, but they need to have mechanisms where they are led by their leaders to actually have input into how they are going to contribute, what it means to them, what they fit in. And the key thing there was really to get the right buy-in from people. And Kellie reinforced again that having KPIs that give line of sight to the strategic imperatives are very important. So it's a very good discussion.
Fantastic. You can just hear some of those principles coming up again and again, no matter where we have the conversation. Well, as we wrap up, really, really big thanks to our panelists. Kellie, Joff, Rowan, thank you so much for your contributions. Thanks to everyone for participating in our conversation today. Next month, a really topical event we're going to run on leading in hybrid, right? This whole idea about what does it mean to lead effectively when people are in the office, out of the office, hybrid, Zoom, etc. So leading in hybrid coming to you in August. And between now and then, you can find us at all the usual places. You can see them here on the screen. Absolutely delighted to have a conversation with anybody about what's happening with your teams. And we'll see all of you again in August, I hope. Tell your friends.